My childhood was dominated by one singular incident. The war years meant very little to me. When I was 4 or 5, all I remember was people talking about the war and that fellow Hitler with a little funny moustache. On one night in 1942, I think it was, I looked out the window and saw the neighbours outside. I walked downstairs, walked out, and the sky was white, bright as could be. And my uncle said, "Those are searchlights. There must be a German plane around. I hope he doesn't think that it's Belfast and drop a bomb." The next thing I heard was a sound, weird sound, and my uncle said, "That could be a bomb." And because we lived in Patrick's Road, and Patrick's Road was between two railways and the canal, it was probably a guideline for the bombers to bomb Dublin. I think it was Belfast. Anyway, next time I heard an explosion, all the neighbours went in, and there was nothing more talking about, and I went back asleep. Next morning, the newspapers had North Strand bombing and so forth, and my grandmother Daisy brought me down to the North Strand, and I saw the wreckage of housing and so forth, and thereafter I knew what the war meant. It meant people were killed and houses were destroyed. And for the rest of the war years, I looked at the paper every day when it came with the maps of Europe as the Allies advanced and so forth. And I realised war was a terrible thing. But I had a very happy childhood. I mean, Drumcondra was an epicentre of class distinction in Ireland. In case people don't know, Ireland is a class society. In rural Ireland, I'm quite positive that the farmer on 5,000 or 6,000 a year looks down on the farmer on 1,000 a year, and both look down on the farm labourer. This has never changed and never will. In Drumcondra, my grandfather living in strange built houses on Garton Avenue, and my mother lived in Lindsay Road. The wealthy had houses that they owned. And people like my grandmother, working class people, teachers, farm or tradesmen and so forth, rented accommodation on Patrick Road, Bridget Road and Columbus Road. And then there was the corporation house in Walsh Road. Now, I'm quite positive I went out with a girl from Walsh Road when I was growing up. My grandmother would have been very annoyed because she would have considered the Walsh Road people to be inferior. Now, my grandfather, with all his money, was not in the least bit concerned about class status. In fact, the only arguments my grandfather ever had was when my granduncle P.T. Kelly, was Fianna Fáil senator, came to the house, and they were always arguing about Irish press shares. Irish press shares became notorious later on when De Valera managed to leave them to his children, and when the Irish press went bankrupt, the De Valera family still maintained shares in the Irish press, which were transferred into preference shares, and he made money from Reuter, which is still being made in 2022, going to his family. I used to visit my grandfather once or twice a month after Mass on a Sunday, and I always got a half a crown. I never told my mother what I got. I used to say I got a shilling, right? Now, in those days, you must remember, we lived on a currency that was very different from the decimal currency today. I don't think the children today would cope with the money we had to learn. The money currency was, there were 20 shillings to the pound. There were 12 pennies to the shilling. And pennies were very important. For a penny, you could get 6 aniseed dates. I liked aniseed dates. You could get a cough no more bar for threepence. That was 3/4 of a shilling. You could get a small bottle of lemonade. And for various amounts, then there was 2 shilling piece, which was 1/10 of a pound, and a 2 and 6p piece, which was 1/8 of a pound. And of course, those coins were what most transactions took place in. People didn't have a lot of money in those days. In fact, the poor in Dublin were often unemployed, and with the scourge of TB relevant, dying like flies, because although they discovered in Scotland in 1908 that TB thrived in an environment where lots of people were together, in the tenements in Dublin, people were 8 and 10 and 12 to a room. So TB in the 40s was a tremendous scourge, and wasn't until streptomycin came in 1950 that the TB was finally conquered. But my childhood was a very happy childhood. I mean, we hadn't got a lot of money. I mean, my great-grandmother had her pension from I don't think Daisy had any money coming in. My Uncle Martin was a bit of Jack the Lad. He never really had a serious job, but always seemed to have money, and he was a bit of a gambler. Now, regarding food, my grandmother ran the house like a sergeant major. And remember, in those war years, food was rationed. You had ration cards for everything. Daisy was a good dealer and barter and so forth, and we always had the regular food routine. Rabbits were bought on a Monday, and there was rabbit on Monday and Tuesday. I think the rabbits were 1.11 each. That's 2 shillings. That's 1/10 of a pound. On Wednesday it was always a pork chop and vegetables. On Thursday, always Hafner sausages. Now, whatever it was in Dublin, there were other sausages like Granby's and so forth, but in our house we always went in, or somebody went into town and queued up for Hafner's, which was in just by the GPO there. It was a shop up by the opposite side of Talbot Street. Thursday was sausages. Friday, usually money was probably running short, and we'd usually sort of fried potatoes and eggs, or sometimes people would bring in mackerel who friends might catch it at home. However, my great-grandmother, who would eat anything, would not eat mackerel. It was scum of the sea as she was concerned. I loved my mackerel, but I realised later in life mackerel caused you to burp and fart, and sort of, it was very greasy fish, but we enjoyed our mackerel. Occasionally there was over to the local fish and chip for a 1-and-1. A 1-and-1 for 1.1 you got a ray fish. It was always ray, not whiting, and chips for 1.1, which you get 1/20 of a pound again. On Saturday there was always a stew, which was very easy to make. On Sunday, some people had joints of roast beef and corned beef. We rarely had that. We usually had a big heart which was stuffed, and that was very tender and very nice. And then for dessert there was tapioca and jam, and my grandmother went to great trouble to get the tapioca, and it was awful, and you had to eat it because it was awful and so forth. As regards fruit, there was only really apples and oranges, or apples and pears, and they're usually crab apples. And of course, in our back garden we had loganberries, gooseberries, and of course the blight of my life, there were flowers, and my grandmother had these hollyhocks which were big flowers, and every time I played football in the back garden I was threatened with having to learn music. There was a music teacher beside me, Maureen Woods, who was really regarded as being a dragon lady. She'd probably be a very, very good music teacher, but I was always threatened to have to learn the piano if I kept on breaking these flowers. So I had to kick the ball very accurately not to hit those bloody flowers. I didn't know what a banana was, except in Shevlin's shop on Drumcondra Road, in the window were bananas, but they were false bananas. So for a variety in the summer months we often cycled out to Clondalkin. Now why we went to Clondalkin as a group I don't know, but Clondalkin was where we picked blackberries, and blackberries were brought home and eaten and so forth. The poor working class kids in Dublin obviously went nearer home, probably around Glasnevin, or more like Ballymun, where there were lots of blackberries. And the poor in Dublin were really poor. I mean, I went to a tenement in Garden Street when I was very young, and Lily, who'd been my mother's maid, and when she lived in Lindsay Road, was showing me her little house, little room, and I was told my mother it was almost no furniture in it, and the table was just a lump of wood and so forth. And my mother said that was one of the better ones. You should see the other one. I didn't realise at that stage how poor people were. I mean, the so-called gurriers and so forth, corner boys of Garden Street, came through Drumcondra when I was 8 or 9, swimming for a swim in the Talca. They never interrupted us playing with happy balls and so forth. They often had got an arse in their pants or shoes on their feet, and they never committed any crimes at robbing a few apples as they went on their way to swim. Everybody in Dublin knew that if they were caught and sent to Dangan, that they were likely severely punished. But nobody realised that they would be underfed like a letterflack on the farm down in the west, and buggerised as well. I mean, that was something that we didn't know about. As I said, sex was something that was completely unknown in Dublin in those days. The ignorance was bliss, and it was very much so in the 50s as well. Continuing on, I think I had another scare in the late 40s. A fellow called Nolan, an ex-commando, escaped from jail, and everybody was afraid of this, and eventually he was caught. He was a tiny little man, about 5'6". Another amusing incident, my great-grandmother Bella, who was an interesting person insofar as her name tells a multitude. It was Isabella Lucinda Fitzharris. Now that does not sound in any way Irish. It sounds Anglo-Irish, it sounds posh, it sounds wealthy. Now, Granny used to have me on her knee, and she told me stories about the drummer man. I was scared stiff of the drummer man because the drummer man came to Drumcondra regularly, and bold boys, he banged his drum, and bold boys were putting the drum, but the people always gave him bacon and eggs and so forth, and the bold boys were putting the drum, and they never came back. They were sent away with the drummer man, and the drummer man frightened hell of me. But Bella was very fond of food. She'd often say to me in the evening, "Are you hungry, John?" I said, "No, I'm all right." She said, "Would you like some boiled onion and white sauce?" So she'd boil an onion, white sauce and butter, and it was beautiful. She also was fond of tripe, but I never eat tripe. She also was very fond of a bit of gur cake. Now, gur cake was a horrible black sort of mushy sort of case. So she'd give me sixpence to go over across the road to get threepence worth of gur cake, and I'd get threepence worth of broken biscuits as well from the shop. And then I had to watch for the Glimmer Man. You must remember, as I told you earlier on, rationing was taking place, and rationing took place also regarding the gas. Gas was only to be used at meal times, and if you were caught using the gas at other times, your gas supply was cut off. So whenever a strange cyclist appeared in the neighbourhood, everybody was thought, everyone kind of thought it was a Glimmer Man. But in actual fact, years later, it was discovered there's only one Glimmer Man in the whole entire city of Dublin. Amusing, that, I must admit.